Okay, so welcome everybody. Um, we're working with Pathwork Guide Lecture number 12 today, this evening. And the title is The Order and Diversity of the Spiritual Worlds, dash the Process of Reincarnation. And the date that it was channeled originally was September 17th, 1957. And, I was sort of guided to this lecture. I think, I was not sure what we were going to do. And then I had a session with a person. She can't be with us tonight, but she's probably going to listen to our recording that I hadn't talked to for a while. And she's done sessions with me before and found out that she had lost her husband through COVID just this winter, this last bout, right? So she was dealing with that and really asking a lot of questions about, what the guide says about the spiritual worlds and stuff like that. So I told her what I remembered, but then all of a sudden this lecture kind of just, I was actually clicking on a different lecture and this one popped up, and so I thought, okay. So I think spirit was guiding. And then oddly enough, it begins with this whole section on war again. And we were talking about that last time as well, and we're reading a Q&A that had some information on that. So I thought it was kind of an interesting sort of synchronicity that happened with this. So does anybody want to share that, look at it briefly, or just check in any way before we begin to read? Okay, so
I'll do it. I don't know if it's a check-in or not. It's just if there's pieces in there that are relating to the planet and upheaval on the planet, I might jump inside, try to pull the two together and get your opinion on it or your background.
okay, yeah,
Something like that.
yeah, I mean,
Because I'm struggling with it.
all that's going on.
Anyways,
Yeah. Okay. We'll see. Maybe it can also enlighten and illuminate and put us a little more with hope and ease around all of it. Here comes Jacob. Okay. So I'll just go ahead and begin. He starts with this blessing. This is a very beautiful short one. I bring you divine blessings, my dear friends. And then he begins, one hears people say again and again, if God exists and there is indeed a divine order, how can it be that so many terrible things happen on earth?
Jolene, I'm on page 5. I don't know where your scroll is.
Same here. Same here.
Oh,
No.
so I'm not sharing. You're not seeing what I'm not sharing what I'm reading.
Right, because I'm reading page 5 right now.
Right, hold on a second. Let me see if I can pause the recording and see if I can. Okay, so back on track. He blesses us, bringing divine blessings, and then begins to, talk about this common question. I think it's in all of our hearts at one point or another, right? If God exists and there is indeed a divine order, how can it be that so many terrible things happen on earth? You all know, you have all learned that human beings forge their own destinies. And this is something that, he goes into in many of the other lectures at varying lengths, and from different angles, right? But that basically the idea is that we're, like here on a kind of soul initiation, a soul journey, and we have set the basic parameters of it. There's room for free will, but we're like have a set of things that are sort of destined, and we've assented to going into and through that, and we brought in parts of our light, and we brought in parts of our darkness, and we're here kind of uh, working to strengthen the light so that the light can overcome the darkness, and we can evolve in that way. So basically, what we're doing in a lot of ways is evolving in consciousness, and what we don't fully understand in our 3D kind of consciousness is that things are not out there separate so much, that what we're experiencing is actually what the guide says is a reflection of our inner soul substance, our inner soul states, that as we go into an experience, we look at, make free will choices around, and ideally we do some transformation, um, especially where there might be currents or tendencies that are not in alignment with spiritual law. So from that place, he's saying, that we forge our own destiny, and that we have to carry heavy burdens, is the result of our own sort of misconception, right? We're misconceiving in some way through our ignorance, and then we're breaking spiritual laws quite unconsciously. But he's saying that that still does not sufficiently explain to us, things like wars, in which through the decision of a few, many who seem innocent have to suffer a heavy fate. And so to this I reply, first of all, even in mass or group disasters, an individual will never need to experience anything that does not fit into his or her own destiny. And second, every person, except those very few who have already reached a higher state of purification, also share the responsibility for the wars and mass disasters. So some of what we're experiencing is the consequences of our, choices, and the way that we are, and so we're reflecting out, projecting out our own inner psyches. And so we all have a certain part of that responsibility. And he goes into that a little more, I think. But before, let's go back up to that first one. Do people sort of understand that? He's saying that an individual will never need to experience anything that does not fit into his or her own destiny, even if they're caught up in some kind of mass event, whether it's weather related or war related, earth changes. So that makes sense. People understand that.
Well, it's a challenge for me in trying to hold my own destiny in what I'm learning on the planet and evolving. And it really can play with my brain, trying to reconcile then at the same time, what is my sense of healthy responsibility for innocent people being slaughtered on another part of the world. And it's difficult to reconcile that. Part of me wants to go put my head in the sand, and part of me wants to get over there and shoot Putin, and part of me wants to it's a far, I in the middle of the night I wake up figuring out what the plan should be and how they should take on Putin, and how, it's like, well, and I know I'm aware that it's nonsense and there's nothing I can do about it, but it's tricky to figure out what is my healthy response and responsibility in this particular situation.
No, I agree. I think it's very challenging, and it's kind of like the puzzle on the blackboard for us all right now, right? So it's what's confronting us, and it's not so easy. I mean, I think it goes, and the fact that, like this has been going on in other places all along the world all along, and we've been completely ignoring it, so it's like a really interesting reflection, right? And it is like, well, what is our responsibility and how do we respond? And I think he does speak very much about, and again, it seems hard to believe, but that our own inner work is sort of like really affecting this collective, space of consciousness that is humanity. And so he's basically saying in this lecture, this part of this lecture, right, that where we're at war within ourselves or with somebody else in our lives, even in small little minor ways, we're contributing. And so, we can talk about that as we go into it more. But I think in this place where he's talking about sort of that even if we're, living through a time, let's say, that like you're part of the, people in Ukraine, right? And some of those people, their destiny is to be killed in that, and some people, are still fighting, and there's a kind of, maybe some people escape, and they might deal with sort of guilt complexes over it, and and I think what he's saying here is that sort of everybody is having the story, having the experience that is part of what is really being woven into the kind of fabric of the life experience for the person, for the consciousness to work with. And so, everybody is working with various, similar things in some ways, but also very unique individual things depending on how it lands based on our history, maybe even our karma or our past lives or our, childhood. And also that, there's this kind of way that if we're not meant to experience something, somehow we will not be involved in it, right? You've heard of maybe the person, that didn't board the plane that crashed or whatever, it's kind of like, I think in some ways what we have to assume is that what is part of what we signed up for, whether we know it or not, and whether we like it or not. Um, and if we didn't sign up for it directly, we signed up to work with the lower self or the negativity, right? That's violating spiritual law, that is bringing us into that state of crisis. Any thoughts or questions? So each thought of hate, of separation, of egoism, of injustice, of discrimination, of wanting more for oneself than for one's neighbor. I mean, take that in, guys. It's like that's like the bar is very high, right? And yet each thought that breaks God's law is a building block in that enormous spiritual structure war, which must first be formed in spirit before it can manifest destruction on the material plane. So let me read those again, because this is where each of us can help in this war, is what he's saying, right? Through becoming more conscious, monitoring and transforming, or questioning at least, each thought of hate, of separation, of egoism, of injustice, of discrimination, and of wanting more for oneself than for one's neighbor. So, and of course, in this war, we can more really identify with, wanting to go fight for one's neighbor or help one's neighbor or do something. I understand your impulses, Dick, and it is like, that helpless feeling, right? Somebody do something, stop this thing, happening. Um, so here we are witnessing, witnessing. And that's, like noticing our inner responses, right? And maybe where there are the thoughts of, I hate Putin, I want to, destroy him, maybe, I know for a while there were some things coming around the Pathwork leadership circle, like everybody find your inner Putin, right? The non-dual understanding ultimately of things is that, Putin is part of us at some level. part of us all. And to understand our own lower self is he's acting out our own, the level of the lower self. And certainly it seems sort of like a kind of numbness, right? And a kind of cruelty that comes out of that numbness that the guide speaks of in some other lectures. But yeah, I also, I don't know, and then holding this place in prayer, like, so all of those people caught in that, and, like our survival guilt, or, like, I think that's something also to explore. And then how do we reconcile when some other of our neighbors, right, are suffering and we're not? What can we do? And what's really being called? And I think it's a big question, depending on maybe where our soul is. I mean, I know some deep spiritual people go all the way, into a kind of monastic kind of existence where they take vows of poverty and serve and take nothing and give all, right? I don't know whether each person is really expected or called to do something like that. But in each of our own ways, I think we are, each called maybe to find something, some way to respond, and ideally, in the positive, if we can, uplift or support, so maybe even, contributing to the Red Cross, or, some organizations, that kind of thing. But again, the guide is really saying here that if we just look at our own separation and all of that within. So I've been actually, really working this myself. Like, it's come up big time. I think there's like this download of energies that has been happening. There was that portal on April 1st, right? And there's just been, the new moon and lots coming up. April 12th is another big, astrological portal. So, and sunflowers that have been really strong hitting the planet and stuff. So I don't know if you believe in any of that. I don't know what to exactly make of it, but I do sort of feel that there are times when it just we're being challenged, or at least I am, and this has been one of them, where a lot of frustration and negativity and uh, war in me has surfaced. And so I've been sitting a lot in the study of my own inner warrior and my own inner desire to go to war, etc. So maybe that will come up a little more as we go, but just pay attention, notice, like, where are you with this? Like Dick is saying, he's ready to go to war with Putin. And I think it's normal, it's human somehow, right? We don't have to like try to suppress that, but also we understand that that can't be the solution ultimately, right? So we're in a state of prayer, in a state of questing, asking Spirit to show us a way that we don't understand. And guide is kind of like, as usual, helping us with these ways of understanding and guiding. So he's saying, if only a small part of humankind sowed the seeds of peace, wars would not exist, in spite of a few unscrupulous politicians. Most people, including you, my friends, harbor thoughts of anxiety, if not thoughts of hate, then of mistrust and separation. So interesting, we don't think of anxiety or mistrust, necessarily as lower self, but he's saying, that it is, such as between one group and another. And all of these violate the law of brotherhood. Each thought of this kind, each emotion, is a significant contribution to the outbreak of war. This does not apply to thoughts and feelings only, or to individual reactions to general political issues and opinions. even when people are free of false reactions concerning society in general, but react in their private lives in erroneous negative ways. This energy will contribute to precipitate a war or another mass catastrophe. Only when you purify yourself from within, cleanse your emotions and thoughts, and so best fulfill your destiny wherever you are placed, can you become also a carrier of peace. Indirectly, by living spiritually, people can do more for or against war than politicians or statesmen, my dear friends. So, and this is where I know, like, they've been having like a prayer circle on a Pathwork, International Pathwork thing, many other organizations as well. So it is kind of like, it's hard for us sometimes to see that maybe there is real power in that, and also real power in our own deep inner work with our own lower self and negativity. Any comments, questions?
Well, I'll jump in again. Nobody's going to. I was just reading another lecture. I can't remember the name of it the other night when I couldn't sleep, churning about this. And it made a statement in there that even if less than 5% of the people of the world can raise their consciousness to a level above the reactive level, it will change the entire planet. And I thought, wow, that to me, that's really hopeful. Even though it may not happen in my lifetime, that's a very small critical mass that can shift things. And then the other thing this afternoon, I was working on installing a new sink upstairs in the bedroom, and the caulk kind of blew up and spit all over. I cussed at that sink and that caulk like I haven't cussed in a couple of years. I mean, I was throwing stuff. I was angry as hell. And thank you for mentioning that about that self-anger is what's churning up inside of me. And actually, I let it rip. It kind of felt good to get it out. So anyway, that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Yeah, no, and it's an interesting study, because of course Pathwork is all about sort of moving it out, and yet I have also been at a place where in my study I am seeing sort of the attachment. So there's sort of the negative pleasure or the negative intention, and I'm also feeling much more of the consequences, right? So as I've been challenged to act it out, then confronted a little more strongly with well, do I really want the end results of this thing, right? Which is the beauty of Pathwork is like it really is simply facing self-responsibility and looking at what we're creating and deciding what we really want, right? And having the understanding that what we are getting, and there's an old saying in the Bible, the wages of sin are death, right? And it was very real. So I'm 71 now, right? If I get into a lot of my negative energies and discharge them without consciousness, right? If I'm identified with them rather than identifying them, then I end up feeling depleted and drained of life force, and realizing that I just like gave away a day or two of my life, perhaps, I don't know. But it's an interesting meditation, right, to begin to realize that, and it's helping, I think, because these forces are strong in us, these old things. It's like, again, in the world, the shaking and the rocking that it's taking for the old to die, right? It's like the transformation that we have to go through, and the ending of the old system, and how the old system fights tooth and nail, right? Not to be done. So, anybody else?
Yeah, I want to chime in. um, yeah, I've had quite a tough time figuring out how to perceive or how to react because in the past, I have a tendency of um, looking away from war and pain in the world, and just kind of absorbing myself in my own little circle. And if it's not really close doesn't hit close to home, then it's not my problem. But this is hitting close to home. I'm originally from Ukraine, so and I have family there, and so this is really much stirring up my own attachments and my own connections to that part of the world. Um, so what I've been mulling over is like, yes, I understand that I need to do my own work and uh, see how emotionally, maybe through my relationship or friendships or et cetera, I might be adding to judgments and the more for me, less for you kind of mentality. But also on some level, my hesitation with only looking at it that way, and I know you're not saying, and the guide is not saying to only look at it that way, but it's just something I'm discovering in myself that I think is important to voice, is that I can use that as a way of not getting involved in the drama that's unfolding. And um, yeah, there's something, because it's hitting so close to home, there's something in me that wants to get involved in a more than just thinking and praying kind of way. Which I remember listening, I don't remember if it was in this lecture or another, where the guy talks about that, you know, while humans are in this state, spiritual wars will be fought with guns and knives, basically, right? Because that's the level of our development right now. And so if there's an evil force that is trying to, I don't know, rape somebody in my family, that I need to use my body, right, and any tools need be in order to stop that evil force from destroying through its uh, distorted perspective, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a question in that. I just have kind of a maybe a more of a calling to be somehow involved. Not sure exactly how yet, but there is a part of me that almost sometimes like wants to go and fight
Hmm.
and say like maybe that's my part of it. But then I don't
Maybe
know.
so.
Maybe I'd just be another dead body, and maybe
Exactly.
I'm
So good. Yeah. And this is, each one of us, is unique in what our destiny is in relationship to these times. Right. And so it is like listening to those things, and then yeah, it's a big discernment, right? To really work through, like the ways that you might be distorting it and doing it out of pride, or distorting not going and doing it out of separation, or it's like it's kind of like there's this narrow thin line that we have to walk. And I don't think we have to walk it perfectly, but we have to kind of find it and do our best to bounce back and forth across the center of it, and not get too far afield. But there is, a deep discernment. Yeah, like I feel I can understand, like and so yeah, the question to God or to your guides, is it my destiny? One of the things that I found is that often the universe, really will configure in a way such as, like to guide us in that and to help that discernment. And we don't have to make it all at once, so it's okay to, just sit with it. And some people, I mean, this is just only one cause among many. I mean, we have, two, you know, one biracial and one black person on our call, so there's this whole, thing that's going on in all of that. And there's all of the environmental stuff, and I'm a big, environmental person. So there's just everything is calling us now in some way, not to put our head in the sand anymore. Hopefully, not to fall for any false illusion of separation. There is none anymore. Um, and then it is, like, yeah, what is my place in this? I mean, I think there are Tibetans and Hopis that are doing nothing but prayer, and they claim that if it weren't for their prayer, the whole planet would topple over, right? And they may be right, but these are the kinds of things that I think we can only feel within our own inner truth and nature. So, and your, response to these times, are part of this destiny. because these times are here with us, as part of all of our destiny. And I think there's that beautiful quote of Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, something about Frodo asking, why we have to live in such times, and I wish I could remember the exact quote, but, Gandalf is saying, like everybody would like not to, but, when we are, we have to be here and respond, right? So, and it is a deep study of how do we hold things in compassion? How do we not go into, how do we do, I'll tell you another good story, Jacob, about the warrior and the approach of the call of the samurai, right? Which is kind of a spiritual warrior position. And so there was this samurai who, had the destiny and task of avenging his master who was slain by a thief. And he's, spent years trying to track that thief down and looking for him and everything. And he finally cornered him and got up and was ready to, put the end to him. And the thief spat in his face. And when he did that, the samurai put his sword back in his sheath and did not carry out the execution. And that was because he'd gotten angry. His emotions had gotten engaged. And from the spiritual warrior standpoint, one can go to war, and there's even a saying that says, and the body is always innocent. So to protect the body, one can defend, one can go to war. But if you're doing it with hatred or with animosity or with anger, right, then it's no longer the pure act that it, would have been, as a duty or as a, some sense of, I guess you would say, presence and not investment, emotional investment in it, but just sort of the angel of death completing their duty in some sense of balance and justice in the world.
I like that story, but I think I don't know if vengefulness I would think of that as a spiritual you know motivation, right? I don't know if that would be, but I see what the point is
And the
do it from a
samurai,
deeper
yeah,
place.
right. His master, I mean, that was his, like his destiny was to avenge. But in our spiritual understanding, yeah, we would question that if a vengeance was a spiritual duty, but yeah, in that system. But yeah, good. So it's kind of like whatever we do, if we can do with love, right? And love can be fierce. Love can be powerful. Love can be even anger, like Jesus overthrowing the money changers in the temple or something like that, like a boundaried expression of no, this is not okay, right? But if the love has to be behind it. If we feel the the lower self desire to annihilate, to destroy, to demolish, like which I often do in my like we can really go to this place where our intent is destructive. So to know that, is a good thing, right? To not to mask that, to pretend that we don't, to justify that, to rationalize that. That's where we get into trouble. Let's see. Where am I? Been moving this and I didn't read it. So he says, question yourself honestly. Feel into it. Examine yourselves when you send out, perhaps until now unconsciously, such poison that aids and abets the powers promoting war. Look at some of your fellow humans with whom you might have difficulties. They might have hurt you and you cannot get over it or understand it. Yet try looking at the issue from another point of view. Try to see that the other person has perhaps reacted to you only from blindness, ignorance, and a great inner insecurity, erroneously attempting to protect himself. Consider how often you have had a similar reaction yourself and may have wounded a fellow human being, not because you wanted to, but because in your own blind insecurity, you thought that this was the best way to protect yourself. To the extent you do this yourself, it will be inevitably done to you by others, although not always by the same person. To the extent you recognize and understand this state of affairs, you will recognize the so far inexplicable behavior of the other person for what it is, just in the way I have explained here. So, he's not only, he's saying, um, that there is an element of projection in this as well, right? That, what we are what we're getting done to by others is often something that we're unconsciously doing. So it's another good mirror for us, really, if we take it on in that way. And then he's also talking about that compassion and understanding, and humbling ourselves to recognize, kind of we're all sinners in this world, right? It's like none of us is perfect. With this understanding, the hurt will leave you, and then the understanding for the other party will increase steadily because you have experienced it yourself and it has become part of your consciousness. From the understanding comes empathy, and that is the way of love. With it, you build your happiness, you gain knowledge and wisdom, you fulfill your life, and so contribute to the cause of peace. Complete this little task, my friend, every single one of you. Take it seriously, not superficially, and then you will feel a great liberation. You will free yourself of a burden. Try not always to focus on yourself and your pain. Try to see the other. Forget yourself for the moment. Attempt to understand the other in the sense I explained before. I don't know if anybody else has read, there's some interesting kind of, psychological profiles and understanding of some of Putin's stuff. I mean, he's still, his behavior is pretty monstrous, but you can see, the total egoic identification and the whole, defense structure that is there. So see his or her pain, not yours. See his or her insecurity, not yours. And ask God to give you the light of truth and knowledge to look at the whole situation as it really is, not the way you are trying to present it from your point of view. I can promise you, my loved ones, that if you are truly desirous to understand the need and the loneliness of others, then you will not experience erroneous acts as painful to you. So, again, we want to make a distinction between somebody blowing up, another country and what he's talking about here, because that's, that sort of real aggression and suffering is at a different scale and everything. But it's interesting, and I find that this is a good key that's hard sometimes to remember, that we really can, be present in the face of others' awfulness, whatever that may be. And we don't have to experience that awfulness as painful to us. And this is a great gift, especially, like where we're going to be in community, or we're going to be, having to take care of, and be in service, to things that are not always easy, right? Or people that are not always easy. I know, people are taking care of parents that are, fading and all of that in our time. And so, I know several people in that situation, and, it's hard to be abused sort of by people that are so unconscious still, and getting more and more unconscious as they get older, right? And yet he's saying that we could maybe even free ourselves from that suffering. If this desire is genuinely present, it will be fulfilled. So he's saying again, ask and you shall receive. But if we know full well that one must make up one's mind to be truly motivated by a genuine desire, So there's this, place where we kind of, we're never like fully committed in our inner being in some ways, right? And that's what I was noticing was happening with this energy of aggression that had been building for a while. And I was, sort of half-assed, like knowing I was working on it, but it finally got my attention, big time, so that I was kind of like focused on it to try to move it. And sometimes it takes life kind of coalescing in that degree, with crisis or some deeper difficulty that helps wake us up to the need to do the work. So, so now he's shifting gears. So, is there any other comments on any of that first part that we?
My feeling about what's going on with Putin is the only solution would be that the people who gave him the power take it away from him. You know, that to me seems like the only viable fix to the situation. And it's just disheartening to see how many people are brainwashed by him, like so many people were brainwashed by Donald Trump, like so many people are brainwashed by people with power. It's just disheartening to watch, and to watch him get away with so much invasion and murder is just, and feel helpless about it. It's just a sadness, that you just can't reconcile. All of this that I just read, I'm sorry, but I'm not feeling any consolement from any of this. I just can't seem to reconcile the sadness that's going on in this situation.
I think they're not an either. I think they're a both and. Like there's, and it's fine. Yeah, we have to. They're two separate tracks, right? So we have to pay attention to our own warrior spirits and our own lower self, but we also have to. I mean, to me, part of the numbness, part of the withdrawal, part of the thing that's happening with this, the sacrifice that the Ukrainian people are making in this situation, and is really for us, right? To open our hearts to become aware, to like again their destiny, what the guide would say in this. And I think it's difficult, but I think it's been my experience that I don't understand how to make it make sense any other way, right? Is that for whatever reason, those people, are in their destiny going through this experience, and that it's going to be valuable for their soul's development, and they chose it for purposes of their own soul's development, the victims on this end of things, right? And the great sacrifice and loss is also for waking up the rest of the world. They were talking a long time ago, the guides were saying something about, all the COVID deaths were people choosing to die. They had chosen at this time to already go. This was the way they chose to leave, right? Death is not, so there's these vehicles that we choose to leave, and we choose by our death to make statements, to change the world. So the people that died of COVID were making a statement to try to change the world around, our medical system, or, and then I think the people, in Ukraine that are, suffering and dying are also in that, way, right, helping wake the world up. And so we can hold them in compassion, we can hold them in gratitude and prayer. I think departing souls need prayer. So, we think prayer is kind of whamsy pamsy or not much, but I think that's incorrect. I think we need to really begin to realize that there is incredible power in prayer, and particularly for spirit, right? And for the departing of the energies from the earth. They need help with that. So all of our meditation and our prayer is also, I think more than we know has effect in this way. Um, but yeah, it's hard to reconcile or understand. And this is where I think we also have to, if we can, allow for mystery, because if we don't, then we have to conclude that, either God, allows evil like this, and none of it makes any sense. And for me, the only real evil is senseless suffering, right? It's like if suffering has a purpose in some way, then, perhaps it's necessary here for our growth, that kind of thing, and we can use it. But where it becomes senseless, that's where, it's beyond me. And so I just keep praying, that again, this we humanity can use this, each one of us individually, for awakening. Um,
I
and
think
those souls, yeah, go ahead.
I think coming from my end of it, I would say, having had war feel so close to home my whole life, with my dad being deployed over and over, and also just being in this life as a Black, Hispanic, Jewish, avatar. The thing that keeps coming to me is I've been kind of meditating on, like, what is this feeling of anger that I was having around, like, why everybody is so touched now versus the everyday suffering of so many people that is going on, and the genocide and the oppression, and how many people are constantly, dying or suffering at the hands of these systems that uphold white supremacy. And what has come through for me is, like, each of these things are meant to awaken the whole consciousness, and everybody is different. And so it takes a different sort of war or suffering. Not everybody's going to be awakened by one or the other. And so it's kind of like this idea that the world is like, and the universe is conspiring to awaken all of us. And so not everybody's going to be touched by one lecture, one religion, one interpretation of things, but it feels like most suffering is purposeful and not for everyone, but for a certain sect of humanity. And so a lot of my anger has been quelled around the idea that, like, this outrage is purposeful for the whole. Does that make, I don't know if that tracks for anybody,
No,
but
yeah, it makes total sense. Yeah.
and
like
so yeah, it feels like it has dampened my anger and outrage around, well, why now does it matter? Because people who have white skin and whatever are suffering, and it's helped me re-engage with my, like, empathy and sadness around any suffering, because in some ways I think for people whose suffering has been ignored by the masses, it can feel like this indignation and outrage now is almost like a revalidation of invalidating other people who have been suffering for so long. But in the end, it's like, oh, there's purpose. It's everyone needs to be awakened, and it takes different situations for everyone to be awakened. And the idea that Putin, is getting away with it is kind of annulled for me because I know in the end we all pay. Just because we don't see him paying now doesn't mean he won't be. The spiritual law says that we all have to pay for every action, whether we get blessed or we are punished. At the end of the day, like, we're paying for everything that we do in the long run. So there's a little bit of peace that has come around me around that anger that I was feeling, and acceptance and self-compassion, because I judged that part of myself. Knowing what I know now, I'm like, why can't I be better? Why can't I not be angry? And so that's just the human part of me. But seeing it as a whole and kind of the macro eagle eye vision of it makes me feel a little more at peace, and also hopeful, because when we see these crises, it's really easy to get hopeless. But understanding that, like, crisis is a opportunity for us to wake up and become more aware is helpful. And I'm not saying it makes it all okay, because it doesn't for me, but it does help.
Great. Thank you. Very good, Dominique. That's
I just wanted to jump in and say kind of that I agree with what she's saying, especially because being like you said, a woman of color or a person of color, I definitely agree, because it's kind of seemed like everybody wants to show up when it becomes important for them. So I definitely understand what she means by that, especially as when we're kind of like the underground, culture, when like nobody pays attention to us or what's going on with us. But then when it's like the next month, it's like Australia or whatever, it comes on, everybody's like, oh my God, everybody wants to donate. It's all over the media. And it's like, huh?
I was saying the koalas are burning. And we're
Yeah,
like, well,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so everybody's like, and I'm like, koalas are burning and humans are getting shot. What's going on? You know what I mean? So it's kind of like dehumanizing, but I definitely I like what she said about the whole piece. And like everything has to go on in their kind of like, in their kind of world, for them to understand what's going on in our world. So I like that.
great. Thank you. So yeah, very rich. Thanks everybody. I think we're shifting, and maybe this can also help inform us, or reflect more from sort of where he's going now into sort of a greater understanding, discussion, of this kind of multidimensional spiritual world, right? And the whole foundation of everything. So he says, when human beings hear about the spheres of the beyond, they often think that all this is too much like conditions on earth, and they cannot believe it. But truly, my dear ones, everything you have in your world is also in the spiritual world, and much more. For earthly objects are only a reflection, an imitation of the corresponding spiritual forms. They actually could not exist in your world unless they first existed in spirit. Thus, spiritual things are not, as human beings often think, symbols. It is the other way around. The earthly things are symbols standing for spiritual reality. In the spirit world, the landscapes or objects are the mental expression, the product of the mentality of the respective spirit being. So, he's talking about, right, when you're in the spirit, it's really more easy to recognize, right, that everything you're thinking, your landscapes, everything that's around you, is a product of your own thoughts, because it just kind of is an immediate sort of production. And in the human world, the objects or landscapes don't have anything to do with the individual, and they are perceived to exist independently and are functional. There are an infinite number of spheres, from the highest and purest to the deepest and most impure, with for you unfathomable gradations in between. Not all the beings who are no longer subject to the incarnational cycle are already in the highest spiritual spheres. They have to develop further, a development which will take place in the spirit world. So I think here he's saying, we often think, once you're in the spirit world, you're, an angel, or you're, a divine being in some way, right? But he's saying that, the spiritual realm is a vast realm of all gradations of consciousness in some ways. And so even beings that are no longer actually going through incarnational cycles on the earth, they're not necessarily fully developed. But the development can take place further in the spirit world. So once we do pass on, sometimes there's stages of development that happen there. So, and then he says the highest world is what we call the house of God. Even though this is not to be understood literally, spirits of higher development who do not yet live in the highest spheres are given occasional access to these highest splendors. These worlds consist of subtle matter of such immeasurable harmony and beauty that you, my friends, cannot possibly imagine. The most beautiful landscape on earth is tainted with impurity and disharmony compared to this beauty. The most beautiful and most masterfully executed music on earth is dissonance compared to the spiritual sounds. I lack the words to describe it, and you lack the concepts. Everything is created from rays. All is in movement and change, and yet in equilibrium. The beings living here have to fulfill their tasks in the great plan until all beings have returned to God or to these highest spheres, right? And so a wonderful order and organization reigns. The most diverse spheres exist. There are spheres of music and color, where the sounds are colors and the colors are sounds. And at the same time, they are also fragrances. On Earth, everything is separated. There is no oneness or blending. One sphere in the spirit world could be called the sphere of science, yet it is not like your human science. All the knowledge that exists, which humankind discovers only partially and gradually, is openly displayed. There is the sphere of history, if I can call it so. I'm hoping this is where we can finally know the truth, right? It does not merely deal with the history of the earth, but also with the history of creation. And here, everything can be observed. You only have to imagine a movie. Everything is etched in the breath of God, and you can review it again. Spirits sufficiently advanced in their development and having specific interest may take on a particular task. They are then guided to this sphere by expert spirit beings, and with their help, study for some time to learn what is necessary and advantageous for the chosen task. They learn the plan of salvation, the history of creation, and all that pertains to it. Here are also roughly outlined plans for the future, always only as a framework, giving each soul enough space to determine the time and outcome with its free will. This sphere, too, is of unimaginable beauty. And then there is the sphere where the spirits of the dead children live to be trained and educated. This sphere is also of great beauty. So, pause here. I do have it was interesting one time when I was in Brazil and we were doing a Mbanda ceremony where they incorporate spiritual entities. They had a period of hymns that called these spirits of what they call the crianças, the children spirits. And it was very, very interesting and beautiful to watch, because what they do in this ceremony, it's African, Brazilian, and they use these amazing African rhythms, right? That are help people incorporate these spiritual energies. And so then you kind of feel the energies within you, and they dance and move and play. And so the child spirits, when they come in, they're running around chasing each other and teasing each other and giggling and laughing and everything. It's really quite something to watch them just sort of spontaneously play using the apparatus of all of these other beings. So I would attest that there are these spheres where the spirits of the crianças live. Anybody want to, he goes on with this a little more, but is there any comment here? Anybody want to, what do you make of these spheres? Does that make sense to you? Does it seem kind of weird and crazy, or what? Okay, so we'll continue. He says, the spheres which no longer belong to these heights also contain wondrous beauty. Many possibilities and varieties of the spheres I just mentioned exist also here, but their perfection is not as complete as those of the similar spheres amongst the highest heights. So it's kind of like gradations, right? Everything depends on the entity's developmental stage. Receptivity for happiness, harmony, and completion depends entirely on the developmental state. So, this is where it's kind of vibrational, or it's frequency leveled, right? So when we think of these, sort of levels and different heights, and think of it maybe in terms of octaves in music on the guitar or something like that, right? Where there's higher and higher repetitive frequencies in a way that so there are spheres of purification, of which the earth is one. Those purification spheres exist on various levels of development. There are further many kinds of schools and universities. There are hospitals, my dear ones, where ailing souls are taken care of and healed. Those of you that have done my Dying into Life course might remember No Solar, right, which was an example of the healing hospitals above the earth, where the passing souls, where they're still kind of ill from their incarnation, are taken and recovered. There are places of rest, also in different degrees, all corresponding to their development, for spirits who have left their bodies behind, and also for spirits who have come to rest in the spiritual world after the completion of a great task. Can you feel how gracious and beautiful this is? I mean, it's like that was one of the things I liked in reading No Solar, the translation. You just had this sense of great compassion and desire for appreciation and support for all of the souls, whether they've, even when they have done a terrible job at living their life on earth, right? They're welcomed and cared for and nurtured back into a kind of wholeness, right? So there's this kind of great forgiveness ultimately that can be there, and it's ultimately our own self that has to forgive ourselves in these situations, which sometimes can be harder than we imagine. So it's good, part of why we, look at that Dying into Life a little, and use death as our advisor, is to see, so if I were to die tomorrow, what issue would I be taking in there that, I would not feel, in harmony and completion and, forgiveness for. So other spheres could be called reception spheres. They are also beautiful, and often more so than your earth sphere, for the spirit entities who are perhaps not yet on a level to deserve continuous bliss. However, they have fulfilled their lives well within the limits of their possibilities and need and deserve a time of recovery before they can resume their path of development. Within an extensive sphere with different departments, there are specific places where incarnations are prepared. In hospitals of a very specific kind, spirit entities who are medically trained work on preparing the fluids, as I have already explained. They draw the fluids together, rendering the entity unconscious for the time. In another part of this sphere, the incarnations are discussed. Here, specifically trained higher beings know exactly the laws and the past incarnations of an individual soul, have studied the loads still to be carried, the merits, the abilities, what has been completed, and what still remains. They know the entire path of the individual's soul destiny, so that they are capable of ascertaining and planning the most advantageous circumstances and conditions for the next life on earth, including the merits and hindrances which each entity is to bring to earth in order to make the most progress. The being who is about to be incarnated discusses the coming life with the higher beings, speaks its wishes, and listens to advice. Then there are different spheres of purification, each according to developmental stages. In the future, I will talk more about how the destinies of the entities unfold, how the unfoldment influences the purification process, and in what this process consists. And then you will understand the functions of the different spheres of purification. Here, I will only say very briefly that there is one specific sphere where a life is viewed, sometimes even several times. At times, the last life is connected with one that preceded it, and only comparing the two brings about full understanding. Now, the spirit who has just concluded its earthly life sees its life with such clarity that it can no longer pretend and make pretenses the way the humans like to do. So this is like our, life review that, we get to have on the other side. And it's different than, he says, this phenomenon of, seeing one's life pass before one's eyes in the process of death. But there is this opportunity and even necessity, right? And I've heard in other contexts that, sometimes we don't want to make that life review, which is why we stay vagabond and don't go into the light. That we're, still unable to face ourselves. So this is why the guide says, self-facing during our earthly sojourn and our time here is very important. So says they are prone, so human beings, they are prone to displace their motives and wear a mask so that their pure currents are polluted by unpurified qualities. But there on the other side, in this review place, everything is clear and open. And in my experiences, I've gone into some of these places inside of me. I felt like I've had an experience of kind of what that life review is a bit about. And what I've always found is that there is a kind of beautiful recognition and understanding, right? So the guilt is washed away. The distortion is clearly seen, but also the original pure, attempted pure motive, right? So, there's a deep understanding and, still, love, self-love or self, like witnessing that is possible in that situation, which I think when we're still really hiding behind our mask and we carry a lot of shame and a lot of, comparison with everything and everybody, that it's really hard to see ourselves. So, as we practice in this life, we will have this opportunity, and I just want to see if you maybe will remember that, it's nothing to be afraid of. It's a gift for us. And my prayer is always, everything I don't understand, I guess hopefully I'll get to understand it on the other side, right? So this is not to be confused with the well-known phenomenon. I think I basically said that. So in the sphere of purification, the process is more extended and lasts as long as is necessary to understand what up to now you have refused to understand. This can be painful. You really come to feel that this is about you. You re-experience your life. And then it turns out that earthly life is quite differently evaluated here on earth while you are still in your body. As long as the body encloses the spirit and imprisons it, the suffering about each trial and blow of fate is great. To experience something difficult seems frightening to you. But as long as everything goes well on the outside, you are happy. Already in these realms of purification, which are by no means high spheres, the experience of looking at the unfolding picture of your last life is entirely different. It is possible that a heavy fate you suffered on earth made you very sad then, but since from the spiritual point of view you have come through it well, it gives you now, as you experience it again, a feeling of endless peace. It gives you a sense of happiness because you passed the test and learned what there was to learn. However pleasant a time passed in contentment may cause great disquietude if during it the spiritual task was not completed. You will re-experience your life often quite soon after you have left the body. And this is important to understand, but you will feel and judge it differently. The happy times on earth may therefore not coincide with feelings of happiness when one day you look again at your life. The person who can achieve already on earth the same deep understanding of his or her life, and indeed experience and feel it as he or she will in the sphere of purification, has accomplished much. His or her purification will be much shorter and less painful, and will give peace and satisfaction. This is the truth behind the human misunderstanding that the person who carries the heaviest burden on earth can experience great joy in the spiritual world, and vice versa. Now, I do not say that this will always happen. A person may not meet a difficult fate well and may not prove himself, but only become more embittered and more separate from God. Another person may prove herself worthy during periods of good fortune, working even more actively on her spiritual development. But this is rarer. Fully experiencing a heavy fate often already brings an advancement and an evening out of karmic debts and helps to undertake your further development with a diminished burden. So in the purification sphere, you see your past life from a point of view which is often completely different from the earthly perspective. And this point of view corresponds to the truth. Again and again, we must observe sadness and remorse, so as so many beings regret that they did not react differently in this or that situation. Again and again, they ask themselves, why was I not able or willing to see this? Now it all makes sense. Or why did I not understand the help that was offered? Why did I close myself against it? Why did I not want to see the true meaning of life, fulfilling the task for which I came? Why did I refuse to believe that this life was not the only reality, that there is much more to it, that it was only a link in the chain? And much of what the person has pushed away as unimportant or accidental becomes clear in this phase of purification. Deep within, the spirit entity will understand the causes. The meaning will open up clearly from these life scenes, which do not only reflect the outer life, but also the soul currents and reactions. You will understand that it was you who refused other choices because because they were too uncomfortable, preferring to convince yourself that everything is senseless anyhow, so why do it at all? Human beings do not want to make the effort involved in developing yourselves, and often you, or at least a part of you, refuse to accept this fact. Some spheres serve to train spirits for tasks in the spirit world that are concerned with humans. And this is also reflected in a lot of those novels that, No Solar was the first one that came from this Andre Luiz collection of another medium that I like from Brazil, Andre Luiz, Francisco Xavier. Andre Luiz is the spirit being that was channeling these stories, and their stories about how he was trained as a spirit being to help people, different humans in different ways. So, and the first begins with his death and his awakening on the other side to understanding all of this. So if you guys want, let me know. And if you go on Amazon and just look up Andre Luiz collection or Francisco Xavier, you should find those that are translated into English. So special spirits are trained to be what one may call mission spirits. They are divided into different groups. Let us take a misfortune on Earth, for example, a train accident. So in this way, probably we could substitute Ukraine, right? It is not the task of these mission spirits to protect the people destined not to die. This is always the task of the guardian spirit. The mission spirit fulfills the task of receiving the beings who come to us so suddenly and completely unprepared. Other mission spirits are specifically trained to receive people who die in a different way, to lead them and offer them help. Another kind of mission spirits go from time to time into the depths, into the spheres of darkness, to bring light and help certain beings, if their attitude warrants it. If the outlook of these entities changes, the mission angels can lift them to a higher sphere. Other specialists among the mission spirits take care of those who have left their bodies in a state of complete unbelief. They offer them help and guidance, which these entities can accept or reject with their free will. There are many more possibilities. I have given you only a small general outline and a few examples. Certainly, for those who have not yet concerned themselves with spiritual questions, all this must seem strange and peculiar. The understanding can come only when the internal obstacles are eliminated and self-knowledge has come about, when you are willing to examine yourself honestly as to whether there still remains any resistance against accepting these truths. And he always says, it's not anything that we have to accept, you know, but to try things on for size, and to see if they fit. And although I've never died, in my recollection before, I have, but, it's like, don't remember it. I think, this kind of thing somehow resonates, makes deep sense in my being. So that's where I go by, right? It's like, these are the things that make sense out of life to me. And so it seems like even if I don't understand it fully, or maybe the particulars are, I've got a slightly different idea of it, I think that this is a good general outline to work with and explore. So he's talking about resistance, and he says that people shy away from knowing themselves truthfully and developing themselves on the path and overcoming resistance. They push away rather what is unpleasant to recognize in themselves. Yeah, this is a requirement of spiritual development for everyone, not only for those who stand at the beginning of the path. It may also be that their reluctance is caused by fear of disappointment, that perhaps it cannot be this way, a fear to hold on to the hope that this difficult life is not the last, the only and final one. I want to go back up this, where he's saying, that it is a requirement, of spiritual development for everyone on the path. And I think, it's like it reminded me of the Course in Miracles, right? Where in the beginning of the Course, it said, that the Course was, mandatory, but, it was, we had our free will as to when we chose to take it, right? So it's a kind of similar thing. We can take our time, we can take all the time, but we have to, if we're going to be participating in this plan of salvation, and the whole universe is and wants us to, then we have to go on this journey. And then I think, this is sort of true, oftentimes we're afraid to risk, to invest in something when we're not sure it's true. We don't know if it's real, right? And so we hold back. And, I think I remember, as a young person feeling very confused and blocked by that, and even more recently, well, I think the whole world is going to collapse. So what do I, how do I go forward? How do you figure out, what to invest in your life? So we're always here, I think, every moment of the day, trying to realize that, maybe even it doesn't matter what, but it's more important just that we invest, that we enter in and really give our best to our own experience, trying to become who we truly are, right? It's like this is our one life, and to become who other people want us to be, it doesn't seem like that's a good use of our own unique individual life. Faith isn't a higher understanding. Faith is knowing, and this knowing is grace. Grace has to be earned. It is earned when the person's goodwill becomes manifest and conquers the unconscious cross currents which attempt to deny the truth. For if the person's goodwill does not relax, the unconscious negative currents will eventually penetrate into consciousness, right? So, this is a step in the right direction when we start acting out and becoming aware of our negative currents, right? So we're always afraid that they're going to show, but actually we want them to come out, because by that we see them, they're in the light. And then of course we don't want to constantly, act them out all over the place with, but to see them and try to make the transformation. Here they can be dealt with and transformed, and thus aligned with the outer good intention. If the intent to know and overcome one's lower nature is decisive, the basis for receiving the grace of deeper knowledge and experience of reality is established. That's a powerful statement, right? So where is your intent to know and overcome your own lower nature? And how decisive does that intent feel? Because he says that's the basis for, and this is something that I've really discovered, right? It's like we do all of this work and there's a part that the ego can play, but the actual healing, the actual transformation is this grace, comes from this grace. So there is this way that, you know, this basis, right? This inner choice, right? What is intent? That's our free will choice, right? And maybe we have to make it over and over again. I do, right? Because I make that choice, and then my lower self possesses me, and I act it out, and then I have to go into seeking truth and seeing clearly and asking forgiveness and facing it again, and then calling the light, asking, reestablishing that intent, and then slowly, gradually, it's been my experience that these things, are transformed within us. So for your earthly world is not the reality, my friends, but the spiritual world is imperishable and the only truth you can always trust. So we're coming to the final blessing. A question that wasn't translated. So he says, now, my dear ones, I have given enough for today. I would like to say to all of you that we are happy if you progress and persevere on this path. All of you receive the blessings of God. Be in peace, walk your path with courage and the knowledge that all your efforts are of the greatest benefit. Nothing that you undertake in the spiritual realm can dissolve or will ever be in vain. Nothing. And again, God's blessing goes out to you and to all my friends, close and far. Be in God. So that, any final, I was just, really like this lecture and all of this description of things. I'm curious to see how that lands in other people. Anybody got a minute to share a little more how that works for you?
Yeah, I'll say that it rings true to me. It's like I don't have to sit back and say, really, is that the way it really is? It just sounds like it rings true.
Some similar, yeah.
I mean, I've heard the guides say before that everything that takes place on earth is really an outcropping of what's going on in the spirit world. And really the order of things, there is a great similarity in the order of things. There are certain levels of education and development here on earth. They don't quite correspond to, spiritual endeavors, but there are levels of education and development. Why wouldn't it be the same in the spirit world? And if life is eternal, you have to do something with your soul, spirit, as you know.
Sit at the foot of God. Sit at the feet of God.
You're not going to hang out and on the couch in the spirit world. That's for sure.
And I just, you're reminding me, Frank, I tend to be in the same camp with you, but there is this, other systems, right? And the one that most I respect a lot, and so it's so different and sort of, I don't know what the answer is ultimately, and maybe also I don't understand the meaning of the text as well, because it seems much darker and much, more frightening in some ways. And that's the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and how the whole journey going through the bardo and, going through the process of trying to awaken once we die. And, it's definitely a different version. And, I like this one better. It's much more compassionate and loving. And, so hopefully it's just, and often I find this, when there's different traditions, that there's enough real similarities, and who ultimately knows, but that it's often translations. I remember when I first was trying to understand, Hinduism a little more back in the 60s. It came across in a very different way than it does today, because the early translations and the early understanding of Hindu texts and consciousness was very different then. So I kind of trust that part of those distinctions come from that. But yeah, we don't know ultimately, but I agree. It's like, this is a good one. Anybody else?
It's always a good reminder to see what it looks like on the other side. It's kind of hopeful and a little scary at the same time. So, yeah. So, but yeah, thank you for tonight. It was really powerful. And I'm going to be signing off here, and wish you all well. Thank you.
Great,
Blessings.
thanks, Dick. Good to see you. Night. So we'll sign off here all together in a minute, but anybody else, any last night? Looks like 2 already left us. So, okay. Dominic, you got any last words?
Thank you, Darlene.
You're welcome.
That was a good discussion tonight.
Yeah, it was. Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.